to another episode of The People's Story. Friday's come round quick now, and tonight's episode is with Northern Soul and music legend, Mr. Ian Dewhirst. Good evening, Ian. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jordan. You okay?
I'm doing good. How are you doing in the current pandemic?
Well, you know what? I was always an only child. So from an early age, I've always been able to amuse myself. You know, I read a lot of books, I collect records, I have to go through catalogues all the time and select records to be released, you know. I keep busy. It's a bit of a pain. I run festivals in Croatia. So I'm actually, I can use my time effectively. You know, so, I sell records as well. So I was thinking about it the other day, and it's like my life's always revolved around music, records, that kind of thing. So I'm just eternally grateful. Here I am, 66 years old coming up, and still very much at the front end of things. Not so much the DJing side of things, but from the point of view of dealing with record companies, dealing with people in the States. You know, I'm at that age now where I probably know more than most of the people I deal with.
Definitely.
So it's good. You can, I get phones out of the blue with people picking my brains or people saying, look, we just bought this catalogue. Is there anything in there that, you think we should look at? Anything of interest, So it's... I'm glad I'm still doing it, and I'm glad I'm still interested.
That's it. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people lose the passion for things, don't they? And it's so great. You were a real inspiration to me because I love your story of where you started and how you got into DJing and then what you went on to do. And this interview tonight is kind of to document your story so far, because I know you're always doing stuff, your story so far of what you've done and what you've yet to do, really. So I want to take you right back to the start, if that's okay. And what we're going to do with your help, because just before we got the camera rolling, or we pressed the record button on Zoom, that is, I was just saying to you, do you know what I mean? I know a lot about you in your early days of living in Leeds and getting into Northern Soul, rare soul music, black music, and I'd love to know more about you and what you went on to do from that. So it's going to be an education for me as well as the listeners. So
maybe we should, I asked myself these questions, and I knew this was coming up. So, you end up giving it some thought. It's like, what was it? I was an only child, right? From, I would probably say a working class made good family, middle class basically, where my dad was a businessman. He wasn't around quite a lot of the time, so he'd generally be away, well, I don't know, once every couple of months, probably half a dozen times a year, right? And like I said, I didn't have any sort of brothers or sisters or anything, so I learned to amuse myself, right? And I was quite well read, I always did a lot of reading and I did a lot of listening. And I got remember getting a transistor radio, I think round about probably 1965 or thereabouts. So normally how it works back in those days, you'd have your breakfast in the kitchen with mum and dad and the radio would be on. Right, and there'd be, on a weekend especially, because my dad was usually off to work, I was off to school, never any time during the week. But on a weekend, you'd have the radio on in the background whilst you're having breakfast. And at that time, this is before Radio 1, it was the BBC Light programme. And they used to have a show called Two-Way Family Favourites.
Right.
And there were lots of kids tunes on there and everything. But then, every so often, you'd have an absolutely banging kind of, up-tempo sort of record. So the first records I was hearing were probably things like My Guy, Mary Wells. That was a big favourite of my mum's. She used to sing that in the kitchen.
Yeah,
when she was, cooking, and she knew the words to it. And so that sort of sensibility was coming through sort of at an earlier, almost, it was kind of, it was part of the background texture of the house. So all of a sudden I started becoming aware of records like I Can't Help Myself, The Four Tops, what was the other one? Reach Out, I'll Be There. It was that particular wave of Motown records that were coming through, and then you'd watch TV and say Dusty Springfield was like a UK, pop star that would be on the London Palladium, but she was a soul girl.
She was she's so soulful.
Oh yeah. And I just reread her biography actually, and so I've been seeing things at 9 or 10 years old, like when she was doing Ready, Steady, Go. I remember that. I remember seeing the artists on her program at the same time as hearing them on the radio. And then I got a transistor radio, I think from my, I don't know, maybe 10th birthday or something like that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that meant that you could,
you had control.
Switch around the airwaves, right? I'm actually doing the motion because it had one of those kind of dials on it. And then you get to hear Luxembourg, right? Radio Luxembourg was a different kettle of fish from the BBC Light programme, which had to appeal to all ages. All of a sudden.
So what would you be hearing on Radio Luxembourg? What was different? What kind of stuff would you hear there?
Well, for instance, Roscoe was on Luxembourg, and he was a big soul fan. Emperor Roscoe, kind of legendary American DJ that worked in the UK, and he was very good on soul and on Northern soul. Funny enough, he was really attuned to what was going on in the clubs. He just knew, he was the guy who broke the Israelites, Desmond Decker, right? And but he'd be the only guy that would play things like Breaking Down the Walls of Heartache and things like that. So at that tender kind of age, 10, 11, 12, was sort of 65, 66, 67. And that was like the real first wave of artists coming over to the UK. So you'd have the Motown tours. I was too young to go to any of these, right? But you'd have the Motown tours, and you'd have the some of the Stax guys as well. And of course, I'm reading about this. I used to get New Music Express and Record Mirror, and all those kind of things. And also, I was befriending elder people. Right, something you're probably well aware of.
Yeah,
okay, so there'd always be there'd be a guy like the next year up at school, but he'd be the guy that would be bringing records in, and there'd be particularly cool girls, and all of a sudden they're reacting to the records that he's bringing in and playing, right?
Yes.
And
so
the whole rest
was
of
you looking, you was really looking up to these people.
Yeah, and they were mods. All right, because that was the other thing. By the time I got to secondary school, it was 1967 or 1966 even, right, when I was 11. And that's probably when my tastes started going totally towards, I suddenly became interested in black music, right? And it was probably through the youth clubs, because again, you go to the youth clubs and the guy who's playing the records would maybe be a couple of years older. And then you become aware that there were some records that were really popular around Murfield, Dewsbury way, and especially with the girls. So the girls always liked Supreme's records. Third Finger, Left Hand, Martha and the Vandellas. Absolute huge, what I call handbag record. And records like that you'd hear in Huddersfield, you'd hear in Murfield. If there was a soul night on it's the sort of thing that you just hear.
Would this be branded? Would this be branded Northern Soul back then, or was this just soul music, Motown?
I became aware of the term Northern Soul. I think through Record Corner's lists.
Okay.
Record Corner started from London. Started sending out lists in, and it'd be about the time that I was collecting records. So probably 69 by now, right? Where some of those, quite a few records were crossing over. It was probably Motown's biggest year in the UK. Sometimes they were reissuing stuff from 2 years before and managing to get a hit with it, finally. So then I started looking at lists, because then I was backtracking to, hear anything that I might have missed. And that's when, I started getting lists from all over the place. And Record Corner used to have they used to have their lists, and they'd always use this term. Oh, northern, this is proper northern soul, or popular in the north.
Yeah.
And then I began to realise that there was a theme to what they call northern soul. It's basically 4/4, fast, uptown kind of beat. And then when I started digging even deeper, right, I heard about local soul night down in Heckman, at a pub in Heckman on a Wednesday night. I was about probably I think I was about 15, right? 1970 this would have been. And I think I went down there by myself, not sure whether I'd even be able to get in the pub or not. And there were these guys there that sort of took me under their wing, right? And they were the sort of Heckman White plot, right? And they'd been to the Wheel, some of them. They'd be going to the Torch. I was still too young for any of this. But then they started telling me, yeah, if you're into soul, you need to go to so-and-so in Huddersfield, Queen Vic in Halifax, Central in Leeds. So they started telling me about all, this kind of network, right, of clubs to go to. I was probably still too young to really. I think I was in the middle of exams.
I bet that was so exciting for you to kind of like. I'm building a picture up in my head, like you said, you went on your own to this midweek pub, and then to be accepted into like kind of the circle by these older guys, and then being told where to go to be exposed more to this. It must have been really exciting.
Well, they trained me. They trained me basically, and for about a year, I kind of hung around with them. And then you'd meet the crowds in the other towns. So if I turned up at the Queen Vic in Halifax, not the sort of pub that you want to walk into by yourself. You might be asking for trouble back then, right? And I was a kid. Do you know what I mean? I really, it was a good job I had, going in with these guys. And, same in Huddersfield. You see, there's another crowd in Huddersfield that, again, would travel to the Wheel. Like the top guy in Huddersfield was a guy called Nova. And he was like Sting in Quadrophenia. He was that kind of guy, but from Huddersfield.
Right.
He was a top dancer. And, I always remember sort of, finally sort of seeing this guy who was doing very acrobatic dancing. And kind of walked around with a bit more arrogance than anyone else. It's like, people would speak about him in hushed whispers. Oh, that's Nova. Yeah, goes to the Wheel, top man, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I got inducted into this kind of really interesting secret society that you really had to be a sort of notch above Joe Blow normal, right?
And what was so at the time, did you have any friends outside of this circle that you created on the soul scene? So what was other people your age into then?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about that because the guys I knocked around with at school sort of were very local. They preferred staying local, right? So I mean, I'd meet up with them in a pub in Murfield. And then, I don't know, we talk about shagging or, something like that.
And what did they think towards what you was coming back and telling them?
Well, one or two of them sort of came along with me, but the majority didn't. But I always remember dragging this guy, and he was a terrible dancer. All right? It was almost embarrassing bringing this guy along because he turned out to be an embarrassment in the end. In fact, his nickname was Twat. Okay, so you know, he was the only one that sort of came along with me on a few occasions, right? But no, my core nucleus of mates in Murfield didn't make the step.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it was down to me. I had to go down to Cleckheaton by myself, probably catch a bus down there. So I was obviously driven, you know, to...
And some people do just take that step and just like, if they're into something, they're into it and they go for it on their own. Do you know what I mean? They follow that journey.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, I really had no encouragement at home. I mean, my dad wasn't into music at all. He was a businessman. Couldn't really understand it. Couldn't really understand, you know, like Top of the Pops would be on and he'd get annoyed, you know. My mum, got to give her credit, she always listened to, I'm trying to think now, you know, like I say, Mary Wells, my guys. She liked the Motown stuff. She liked Dusty Springfield. In the 70s, she loved the Stylistics. So, and quite often she'd pick out tunes. So she was the one who put me on to Walk On By, Dionne Warwick.
Right, yes.
Right, which is, 63, 64, thereabouts. And it was her unraveling the record for me, right? You know, basically saying, well, listen to the arrangement, right? And she'd start talking about, you know, there's a harpsichord there. There's something there. Now, this is another sort of weird thing, because her brother, my uncle, was actually in the music business at that time, was an arranger, used to do quite a bit of stuff. And I found out the other day that he actually he produced Long John Baldry's version of The Drifter.
Right.
Which I never knew. Right?
Yeah.
All this time, I only found out the other day, yeah.
So it's in the family.
Yeah, so I had this uncle, Bob, who lived in London.
Yeah.
Right, who I can remember seeing as a kid at Christmas. And then you know, I never saw him after I was 10 years old. I was like, well, where's Bob? Bob used to be quite fun. He used to be pretty easygoing, you know, and just a general kind of easygoing attitude. So I used to kind of quite like seeing him. I'd only see him once a year because we were in Leeds and the whole family was in Brighton. So the only time I'd see him was every Christmas. But Bob was cool as hell.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the rest of the family were a bit jealous of him. And he used to do his own thing. Right. And he was in London and he was actually working with, you know, regularly, sort of pretty much from 62, 63. He was doing TV things. And so that's kind of what got me interested in the music biz. There was one time we were coming back from Brighton and I was only about 12 and we'd arranged to drop in at Bob's on the way back. And Bob lived in this Muse house just off Maida Vale. And he was living the life. He wasn't even up. We turned up, I don't know, lunchtime. And the guy was getting out of bed, and then there was Swedish blondes everywhere. I'm like 11, 12 years old, thinking, this is what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Right? You know, so there was always, you know, there was always this sound like I quite like the sort of life Bob's got. He's in London. He used to be out in the clubs every night. He's hanging with all these pop stars. Yeah. And he's living on Maida Vale. He's got hot and cold running Swedish blondes. You know what?
Fantastic.
What's not to like about that?
Yeah. So what the clubs that you was talking about that you went to the midweek, these kind of pub things, and you mentioned the lads from the Wheel. When did you first attend, you know, a major? What these were feeder clubs, I'm guessing. So what was your next step after that?
Well, the next step. Well, there were two steps because I was sort of. Yeah, and I think this would have been when I was about 14, and this is quite an important step. I was spending an awful lot of time playing records, right? So I was essentially starting to, you know, collect records, right? Every excuse I could have to get in a record shop and bring home records. and then sit down, play them was the main thing. And I had a Saturday job in a clothes shop in Huddersfield. And I mentioned to the guys in the shop, yeah, I'm kind of into soul music, Motown mainly, that kind of thing. And then it turned out that the manager of the shop was a sort of ex-wheel boy. So, every kind of Saturday I go in and he'd be telling me about how great the Contours, It's So Hard Being a Loser, and he knew all these records. And then I said, oh, look, if you know anyone who's got a collection of that stuff, that's really the stuff that I want.
Yeah.
And it turned out he had a friend who used to be like a local DJ in Huddersfield called Lord Djing. But Lord Djing had all those wheel, classics. So he had everything kind of, let's say from about 63, 64 up to about 60, 68, right? And he had 400 records. It cost me 25 quid for a suitcase. It doesn't sound like anything now, but 25 quid back then was, quite a chunk, maybe a couple of weeks' wages. I wasn't even working, don't forget, I was a kid. God. So my dad lent me the 25 quid.
Yeah.
Basically gave me the 25 quid.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I was interested in.
Yeah.
And he must have been pulling his hair out thinking, what am I going to do with this weird kid of mine who doesn't seem to want to play football? He's not going to be a mathematical genius. He's not displaying any talent whatsoever for woodwork, metalwork, anything manual. But the only thing he's interested in is music. So my old man, bless him, bought me those records. And then that was like a period of, like literally playing the A and Bs and going through all these records, right? And that kind of gave me really good solid knowledge of the wheel, the kind of stuff that was playing there. So, probably that was instrumental. That caught me up with stuff. And and then I also, round about that time, when the very first copies of certain things were coming in, Times Are Wasting, the Fuller Brothers, Quick Change Artists, Soul Twins, Keep On Keeping On, NF Porter, so records like that were suddenly appearing on import.
Where was they appearing? So when you say they were appearing, are these in record stores, shops?
Probably at this point, they're more likely to be in record boxes.
Yeah.
Like, people would bring them to a youth club.
Okay.
So things like Love on a Mountain Top. That actually, certain records crossed beyond. They've become so popular on the northern scene that they'd invariably spill out. So records like I've Been Hurt, for instance, and Hey Girl, Don't Bother Me.
Yeah.
Another example, and lots of the Motown stuff, they became almost staple, sort of A-level Northern Soul, which would be the Twisted Wheel, and then B-level, which would be guys that went to the wheel or got their records from similar places and played locally, a bit like it is now, really.
Yes, yeah.
And then the other, and I've got to get this in before I get to the next bit.
Yeah.
Probably the single most biggest thing was Bradford Market. Bradford Market.
Oh, I've heard. Do you know what I mean? I've heard so many people talking about Bradford Market, and I think, you must be crazy. He says, yeah, I got this off Bradford Market. And I'm like, right, okay.
It was like nothing you've ever seen, Jordan. It were right. What it was, they bought the old MGM Verve warehouse from the States, right, and some regional distributors, right, and they just put them out on the stall, right, and I think when I started going, I think you could get 20 records for a quid. So these records were 5 pence each, okay? Yeah. And, if you got 20 of them, quite often they'd have packs that had 20 records in, and you pay a quid, and it was hit and miss what you got. But once you've been there a while, I could sort of say, well, let me go through everything and pull 20 out. Is that okay? And they got to know me, and I was up there every Saturday lunchtime because I had again, by now I was working in Bradford as a Saturday boy in a clothes shop. So I'd get up to Bradford Market every Saturday lunchtime and buy 40 records. I used to spend £2. You know, I only earned about £2.50, I think, but I used to spend £2 at Bradford Market, bring 40 records back, and those 40 records would keep me quiet for a week, just playing the A and B sides, you know, and so, right, okay, yeah, I'm definitely going to keep that. I hate that. Let's do what, you know, that's slow. So I was kind of stockpiling, you know, records. And then I got so many Northern, you know, everything on MGM was there. Like, you know, the Times, What Would I Do, April Stevens, Dottie Cambridge, the Charades, Verve, the Shalimars, the Triumphs, Walking the Duck, Warner Brothers, Alice Clark, You Hit Me.
Oh,
you could buy Alice Clark for 25 pence.
Off Bradford Market.
Bradford Market. And it was almost like I wouldn't call it a secret, but it wasn't an everyday place. You know, you'd have to, you know, most people wouldn't be bothered about what they were selling there. So, but it really was fantastic, and it stayed good for 3 years. They're constantly putting stock out. Right, I didn't even realise that they had a warehouse, and then eventually John Anderson got to it and kind of pulled everything that was any good out the warehouse. Right,
yeah.
But prior to John Anderson going, they were, you know, they'd go to the warehouse to load up the stalls. And so there'd be a constant flush of things coming through. I mean, I found unbelievably rare records there.
Them records that you're mentioning, you know, I'm imagining them back in this time that they were major records,
big
classics,
records,
big classics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what then got you a DJ spot?
Yeah, because what happened is almost by default. You know, I had an awful lot of stuff. I had enough to be able to do local gigs. I think the first gig I ever did, I remember it like the back of my, in the back of my head. First gig I ever did was Bradford Polish Club. And I remember bringing my records along. I don't know who'd invited me, but somebody said, yeah, bring your records down and you know, you can play a few. And I got down there, and that was the first time that I met Andy Simpson, Kegsy, you know, famous record guys, you know. And of course, they pounced on my box, and then the first thing they saw was an Art Freeman on Red Atlantic.
Did you know what you had? You know, because if you're buying these records at 20 ago, I know you said you could individually pick out records, but if you get them from packs and things, you must have had stuff that you probably wasn't aware of.
I had some Ride in there.
Yeah.
Earl Wright. And so you know, you know, and there were, I mean, I can remember certain records that I found there, I'm pretty sure before anyone else, right? And one of those was Ronnie and Robin, As Long As You Love Me I'll Stay, on Sidra.
Yeah.
What was the Sidra record doing on Bradford Market? I found Lenny Curtis, Nothing Can Help You Now, on AIM.
Oh my God.
10 pence.
What?
And the funny thing is, right, I, about 50 years later, something like that, 45 years later, I was up to see Tim Brown. He's an old mate of mine.
Yes.
And so I'm in Hebden Bridge, you know, having a pint with Tim, and Ginger turns up, wanting to get a value on some of his records, and so he had his records with him. So Tim and Ginger are going through his records in the pub, and there's Lenny Curtis came out, and I looked at it, and I said, you know what, I bet that's my old copy. And they both laughed at me, like, you know, what's he talking about, right? Yeah. But actually, I used to DJ under the name Frank. And at a certain point, I was inscribing Frank into the run-out thing. And I pulled the record out, and there was my name, Frank. Yeah, so look, I told you. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. But so that was Bradford Market. And then I had this nice, nice, decent collection. I had Lord Jim's stuff from the suitcase in Huddersfield, with 400 tunes in, of which things like Art Freeman and some other stuff came out of there, and aligned with Bradford Market, where over the course of 18 months, coming on with 40 records week in, week out. Work that out. I think that was, I probably had about 2,000 records or something ridiculous, from just from that. An awful lot of junk as well, I had to trade the junk off with other people,
Something I'm really fascinated about is, because I'm so passionate, more so now as I've gone through my journey on the Northern Soul, the rare soul scene, is finding more information about the artist. So when you was picking these records out, and they caused a reaction to you, like you was thinking, wow, this record is absolutely amazing. What did you think about the artists behind them? Did you have any, because obviously there was no internet, there is no
there was nothing like that. My interest in the artists behind them probably came out in later years when I started seeing gigs, and then when some of them would come over, but no, they were just names on the label. I wasn't thinking about how tortured Linda Jones was when I was listening. She obviously was tortured, but
I just find that whole time, on the Northern Soul scene, just must have been so exciting, just to be on this like underground kind of subculture.
Yeah.
And like you said, you're in that inner circle now. You're getting these records, and then they buy these obscure artists, and you've not even got a photograph to go next to these names. It's just must be so exciting.
It was incredible because there wasn't really any other scene like it, right? And people used to, they're a bit more passionate. They used to try harder. People would dress better. There was always maybe a whiff of arrogance, like when you got on that scene, you're what do they used to call us? There was a derogatory term, like a stiff or a wally, or someone who hasn't quite
a div,
fitted in. Div,
div.
That was it, right? And so, we're all divs. You had to accept that. I'm going to be, some of these guys have been around 2 or 3 years longer, and it's quite a macho scene. This was, kind of quite athletic dancing, and that was never going to be my side, right? I wasn't very kind of nimble or dancey at all. I was always more interested in the actual music, right? The mechanics of the music rather than the mechanics of dancing. So I was always going to be I was always one of them people that would be talking to the DJ, right? And in the case of the Central, so the first time I went down the Central in Leeds, that was the first main club that I went to, outside of, odd local things. So I went down to the Central, and then pretty quickly met Tony Banks, right? And because I was, I'd be the guy that get him a drink and go sit kind of next to the DJ area, more interested in what the next record he's going to play is, what's the label and all that kind of thing. And so then I started bringing records down, right? I'd say to Banksy, have you heard so-and-so, so-and-so? I think you played Thumb a Ride off an acetate. And I said, oh, I've got this. And he's like, no, you haven't. I said, yeah, I've got it. I've got it from Bradford Market. He said, I'll bring it down next week. So I brought it down. And of course, boom, everybody, like, do you want to sell it? Do you want to sell it?
Yeah.
But I'd already been trained with the Art Freeman at Bradford Polish Club, right? So all of a sudden I thought, you know what, I'm starting some rare records here, and bit by bit, the sort of jigsaw pieces of knowledge were clicking in. So I was becoming a bit more, I guess, confident. I'd almost feel like I'd done 2 years in the trenches, listening to the records from Huddersfield, buying from Bradford Market, eventually infiltrating into the sort of Cleckheaton local Dewsbury, Huddersfield.
And I'm guessing people are starting to become aware of you as well as a collector.
I was probably always a record guy. I'd always have a little box with me, and like there'd always be spares to sell or trade or whatever. So I always had that kind of side to me too. And of course, I'd always be the first to pay. You know what it's like. I don't have to tell you. You're like the living embodiment of me at that age, right? Where your thirst for knowledge is just that you leap into every record box you can get, right? And normally the guys that have got record boxes are collectors themselves, and they know quite a bit about it. And so, the Central was probably the first place that sort of put me on the map. And then I got the chance to play records there.
Is that the first place you ever DJ'd?
Hey?
Was that the Polish club was the first place you DJ'd?
Polish club in Bradford.
And then is the Central your first big
one? Yeah,
first big one.
And I probably went down there for 2 or 3 months, right, before eventually Banksy started insisting that I come down. And I'm like, well, I might have to go on holiday in a couple of weeks, Tony. Well, leave your records with me. I was like, I ain't going to be doing that. so somehow I kind of, I said, well, look, I don't mind coming down. Why don't you let me play early on? Or I probably pushed myself into it somehow. And also having had a bit of experience and bless him, Banksy gave me that opportunity. And this was with another guy called Djing. Right. Also, one of the first guys that I met, and he was also a collector. And so it was Frank and Djing, right? And we used to basically warm up for Tony Banks. And then Banksy had a fallout with the people who ran the Central. And the next thing you know, there's a panic on. And they said to me and Djing, you're going to have to do all night. Right, so all of a sudden it was like, oh Christ, it's like when you came down to London the other year, right, and you were panicking about that 100 Club set, and you wanted to make sure you had enough bangers with you. Well, this was me and Djing, knowing that we were going to have to do the Central. So that week was a runaround to see people like Julian Bentley.
Oh, what a legend! Yeah, Julian.
He was highly instrumental in establishing us because he'd already been around for several years, right? And Julian was local, so Julian was 3 miles away and virtually lived, I think, less than a mile from Djing. So the likes of the Salvadors, Susan Barrett, United 4. Lots of records came from Julian, and between the two of us, we got a lot of records, together really quite quickly, and then it gives you that stability to build from there. And they didn't all have to be bang super duper rarities. I mean, this was the time where some of the big records were still holdovers. Looking for You, Garnet Mims was a holdover. The Way You've Been Acting Lately, Al Kent, a holdover. Need Your Love So Desperately, Peaches and Herb. There were certain records that never got bootlegged, right, but were still popular. What Kind of Lady, D.D. Sharp, So we all had records like that. Competition Ain't Nothing, Carl Carlton. So we all had records like that in our boxes. But it was just at the point where some rare records were rare records were starting to come in that weren't going to come in the same kind of quantity as other ones. You didn't always know it at the time, but eventually you got like a bit of a sixth sense, and so Julian helped us out there. John, by this point I would have been dealing with John Anderson. Brad from Burnley, who you probably know, right? I used to do Burnley Cricket Club every Tuesday. And I did that gig mainly because I knew Brad would be there.
So that's that's another weekly gig you've got going now on a Tuesday.
Oh yeah. They start adding up.
Yeah, they're starting to add up now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that probably Burnley was a little bit later, probably when I was doing Wigan and all the other plays, but the Central was the main one, right? And that was Friday night. And then as a result of the Central, they asked me if I could do the Starlight in Huddersfield, right? And they said you only have to do an hour. You can after you've done the Central, right, come to get to Huddersfield for sort of 12 o'clock, and you can do 12 till 1. So, oh, right, okay, you know, I'm only 16 or whatever I was, 17 at this point, maybe 72 thereabouts. But already I'm doing 2 gigs in one night.
Was he driving then? Was he driving?
Yeah. Again, I was lucky. I had a car, right? But a car was almost a prerequisite for me by this point. I was working for my dad's exhibition company. And so I was the guy that they sent out. I was a kid that they sent out to exhibitions here, there, and everywhere. So again, I was kind of used to driving, used to traveling.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it's something I could combine with, you know, if there was something on in London, for instance, Earl's Court. It's like brilliant. I'll get down to London. I'll be able to go to Berwick Street Market, where A.D. Crowsdale was on the store.
Right. Okay.
And I'd see Tony Rounce there. I'd see Ian Clark. Dave Burton worked downstairs at Harlequin, just up the road. He'd always have stuff under the counter, you know. So me going almost anywhere in the country was good, because there would always be these pockets of soul fans around, you know. And then after I'm trying to think of the all-nighters. So Wigan was the first. No, the Central was the first all-nighter, because I did the all-nighters there as well. And then I got invited to do Wigan.
Had you been to Wigan previously? I
was there on the first night.
Oh, wow. What was that like?
It was great. It was great. I was literally there from, and I didn't know anyone, but I think we went to Blackpool Mecca, because we were going to Blackpool Mecca a lot at the time. That's when the Mecca was just so brilliant then. You know, it's literally the first place that you'd hear some of these records, right? And had a great reputation for that. And also, you know, the Mecca really did draw people from all around the country. So I get down the Mecca, and then you start looking through people's boxes, and there'd be like Mopsy from Sheffield.
Yes,
he was always there with his leather coat on, right? And he used to do carvers for people, even back then, what we used to call Emmy discs. And there'd be the Welsh guys. They were big into Detroit, so those guys had different records from what we were seeing in Yorkshire, which was mainly coming from Bradford Market. The guys in Wales were finding lots of kind of Detroit stuff. And then same thing, Birmingham. You know, you'd have Pep and Steve Glover, and there'd be, you know, some big collectors from Birmingham. And again, they had different records, or they had records that had gone big in that area. But there's no internet connecting all this, so the only way you find out,
it's almost like people's accents, isn't it? You go around and you're hearing different types of soul music. It's amazing.
It was really wild. And then you get into conversation, right? And it'd be somebody like Pete Lawson. You know Pete Lawson?
Another legend.
Well, you know, these legends were literally there every Saturday, and Pete could hardly speak, but he always had incredible records in his box.
Yeah.
And I didn't take drugs. You know, when I was on the northern scene, I didn't take drugs. I was always the one who was driving, you know, and always very, very sensible in those days. And Pete would be, not making any sense at all, right? There'd be dribble coming out of his mouth, and he'd be saying the most incredible, you know, stuff. And I'm like, where's he finding out about these? How's he managed to? I still don't know how he had the knowledge he did.
I'm sure, because I'm friends with Dave Malloy from Wigan, who was friends with Pete Lawson, and he was saying, like, you know, people would like kind of overlook him a little bit from a distance, but then get, like you say, get talking to him and then be just blown away by this man's knowledge. And he was like actively writing letters to all these places in America and sending letters out to people, trying to get a response. Yeah.
It was incredible. I mean, I knew that there was a kind of deep side to him, but I really avoided him a lot of the time because he was seriously off his head. Right, I didn't get to know Pete until he started coming over to Leeds buying records off me after I come back from the States. So Pete used to come over to my place in the late 70s, and you know, this would be midweek, right? And all of a sudden, you know, when he wasn't blasted, right, midweek, he'd tell me amazing stuff, and I'd be thinking, how the hell he must have spent bloody months banging off letters and keeping in touch, right? And again, you know, you'd get these snippets from, you know, all over the place, right? You know, like I say, you know, for a lot of expertise on Detroit. There's this guy from Wales called Russ, and he was very, very good friends with. It was probably Martin Capel and some other guy whose name I've forgotten, but there were those connections there. There was Julian Bentley, John Anderson, obviously. Later, I'd go down and visit him. There'd be Clarkey in London, Dave Burton in London, Jack Bollington, Kev Roberts in Nottingham. So you'd have these dealers. The guy in Manchester, he was a good one. Forgotten what his name is now. Brian 45 Phillips.
Oh,
he was
yes, he's still
regular supplier.
Scene. Yeah,
regular supplier, and many times, you know, I'd ring him up, you know, because he'd tell me that he's expecting stuff. You know what it's like. It's like, okay, right, I better be quick. And I'd ring him up and, you know, like, what have you got, Bri? He'd say, Malibus, Little Eddie Taylor, you know, I'd obviously just got a shipment from Texas, right? And I'd have to drive over the Pennines and get to him before anybody else did.
So you're really in this network of people now. You've got your connections. You already had this collection what you built up yourself without really the knowledge of the outside scene. Now you're in the middle of it. You're in the epicenter, really. You DJ in Wigan, Cleethorpes.
Cleethorpes, Sheffield, Samantha's. Yeah, I mean, I had 3 gigs on a Friday night. So I'd have Leeds Central, Huddersfield Starlight, and then Samantha's through to 8 in the morning. And then quite often from Samantha's, I'd drive down to King's Lynn, see John, right? Or that other guy, Bob. I used to get records from him, Bob from Louth.
Right.
So again, if I was heading that way, it's like I put a call into John, generally be something to pick up there, and then maybe have a gig around Lincolnshire or somewhere around the East Coast, and then, you know, sort of curl back to Leeds, you know. Weekends, I didn't really sleep much for about probably 4 years, I would say, from probably 72 to 75, we'll say 3 years. But that was 3 years of every single weekend, you know, it'd be, and that usually a Sunday all day. So it'd be like Sheffield Samantha's Friday night, Wigan Casino or Cleethorpes on the Saturday. I was the only one who did both of them at the same time, right? And then generally an all-dayer on a Sunday, you know, and then I'd get home on a Sunday night, collapse, and then drag myself out of bed on a Monday morning, you know, pretend to go to work.
Yeah. So now we're up to, you've formed this great circle of connections. You're DJing here, there, and everywhere. When did you decide to make that big step to go over to America? Because that, I think that is, you know, there's very few people that did that back then. It was expensive. And, you know, I suppose back then, like we talked about earlier, there was no internet. I suppose it was a scary thing for people to go over and be like a duck out of water in another country, thousands of miles away. So I'd love you to tell me about that. Why did you decide to say, right, okay, I want to go to America?
Well, what happened, and it happens with a lot of people, right? You know, you get to a certain sort of position. I consider I was, you know, certainly in the top 10, maybe the top 5 even, of DJs at that particular point. And I was probably at a wider spread than most, being as I was doing the East Coast, doing Wigan, doing Leeds. So I had a good sort of network of people. You know, all my gigs were generally, you know, pretty packed. And so it really was like coasting on a roller coaster, right? And it was, you know, it was a buzz. It was a buzz. You know, I was working with good live acts. You know, I was the guy who brought the Tramps on at Cleethorpes, for instance. And, you know, it was kind of quite a glamorous thing at the time, you know. It got to a point where everything was kind of coasting along on you know, really, you know, and really very pleasant. And then I can remember that it started to get more difficult to get records. Right. So, you know, by this point, I'm in the top tier, right? And very competitive up there. Very competitive. Plus, you got guys coming up behind you, right? Maybe with bigger checkbooks, right? Because that would happen quite a lot. You know, you'd be trying to engineer, like, you know, a reasonable deal, and if someone else got a sniff of it, you get gazumped.
Yes.
Right. And it happened to me on well, there's two things that brought it into real focus, right? There was one copy of Bernie Williams, Ever Again, in the UK, and the person who had it was Colin Curtis, but the Mecca wasn't really the right venue for that record. It was two 60s,
yes,
right, and you know, two traditional sort of northern. And I was said to Colin, right, it was like a last hour record. He put it on and almost apologised for playing it, right? And I'd say, you know what, Colin, that record's wasted.
Yeah.
Let me have the fucking record.
Yeah.
Because I can bust that at Wigan. I can bust it at Cleethorpes, right? But of course, you know, you don't give a record like that to another DJ. What he ended up doing is because he couldn't use it that much, he ended up doing some sort of swap deal with Jack Bollington in Derby. And then when I heard when I heard Jack got the record, I'd done a few deals with him before, so I thought, well, okay, it's going to be doable. So I rang Jack up, said, look, there's no point in you having it. What are you going to do? Sit at home, you know, and listen to it forever? That record needs to be with somebody like me.
Yeah,
I need that because I'm playing to big fucking audiences. Come on, you know. And so eventually we agreed on what would have been the highest price that I'd ever paid for a record by then. I paid 30 quid for the Tamangos for the second copy. And I think that was my limit. I paid quite a bit for Cool Off, Detroit Executive's second copy again. But, you know, the way prices were rising, I think I paid 15 quid for Cool Off.
Yeah.
When there are only 2 copies. Right, and then I paid 30 quid for the Tamangos, 2 copies. Do you know what I mean? Right, and then all of a sudden, Bernie Williams, and it settled at 40 quid. That was still 2 weeks' wages back then.
I'm just trying to work it out. Yeah, that must be.
Yeah, so 40 quid was really, you know, imagine almost the equivalent, probably to $1,000 today. Yes, it's £1,000 record, right? Yeah. And anyway, Jack agreed to sell it, and then I made the biggest mistake of my life. It's John Manship's fault. All right. I was at Cleethorpes. And
John was DJing Cleethorpes as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was up and coming, right, and with a passion in him that I recognised all too well. And so and I knew he was dealing with Bob Catania in San Francisco, right? So I sort of say, "You got anything good coming?" And he'd tell me, what he was waiting for or what he just got, and I'd tell him, and I told him about Bernie Williams.
Oh, no,
big mistake, big mistake, man. I should have been much more sensible, right? John didn't waste any time.
Yeah,
right. He got on the phone to Jack Bollington and offered him, 60 quid and a world column and a Rosie Jones. Right. Wow. So all of a sudden, right, and then I can't get Jack on the phone. Then eventually, when I get him on the phone, he's like, "Look, it's a bit awkward, really, because John's offered me this ridiculous amount for it." And so what happened is it kept going up and up and up. It was like a bidding war, right? And then
a bit like today.
Yeah, exactly like today. Yeah. And then it got to the upper level limit, beyond which I just couldn't see it. I was around about the 120 quid mark. So it had gone from 40 quid to 120 plus a couple of swaps. So almost nearer 150. And at that point, I thought, you know what, actually, what this is going to turn into is he with the biggest checkbook.
Yeah.
It's turning into being about deep pockets. Right, and I didn't really want it to be about that, right? And that was the first sort of thing. And I was buggered off because seriously, if I'd have got Bernie Williams, that would have been another one to go with the Lou Pride and the various others that I was playing. It just would have been a nice addition, plus the only copy, But by now, the prices were going really nuts. So 500 quid for James Fountain.
Came out on British, right?
About a week later, yeah. So I didn't, right. I could see what was going on, and I would not be able to take a hit like that. You know what I mean? Right, all of a sudden, I thought, you know what? Right, all of a sudden, and the other problem was that nobody had sold me records anymore because they knew, right? So if they had an unknown, right, and I went to Peterborough, and again, I like doing other kind of gigs, so I did the Arena Stadium at Peterborough, but you'd always get to see different records, a different part of the country. They seem to have different, records, and I bumped in. This guy had a copy of Right On by Al DeLore, right? This is the time when you maybe expect to pay maybe 3 quid or £5 for an unknown, right? But this guy was like, well, no, because the minute I send it to you, you're going to play it.
It'll be massive, yeah.
And then it's going to go massive, right? And then I suddenly realised, you know what, I'm being penalised here, simply because I'm playing the biggest gigs in the country, right? And I'm finding it hard to get records out of people, and it was almost like it was making me feel that I was going to have to pay a premium simply because of, my position, which, after years of getting records cheap, 10 pence mostly, all of a sudden to suddenly be up in that rarefied atmosphere where, you really going to have to think about whether you want whether you want a decent car or whether you want to be spending all that money on records. And it suddenly clicked. So I thought, you know what, actually, maybe it's time that I moved on and explored other, I always loved Northern Soul, but, I also like contemporary soul. There's a lot of music I like, and also the early Yeah, you know, I always went to contemporary clubs as well as Northern. So it wouldn't be unusual for me to go to Primo's in Leeds and then go to Wigan Casino.
Right.
And of course, I went to Blackpool most of the time. Blackpool was very progressive.
Yeah.
So I was really into a lot of different types of music. And also, I was 21. I've pretty much been on the Northern scene since I was 16. So I'd had 5 years, really, of the best of the scene. And, you know, I was suddenly feeling a little bit hamstrung by being in Yorkshire, I think. Mm. You know, I was ready to go, ready to move. And I really thought, you know what? I fancy going to the States. I fancy finding records, right, and finding them, you know, affordable. Everybody's dream, really, to go digging. You know, you wake up every day, point the car in any direction, and see what's out there, right? And so, you know, I had that kind of sense of adventure and an interest, I guess. And it was great. It was absolutely great. You know, it shows you that, you know, you should do certain things sometime because, you know, really going to the States really kind of pitched me into the mainstream music business at that point, you know, because when I was I went to LA, the only contact I had in LA was Soussan, who was a notorious bootlegger. Yeah. Right. But nonetheless, he was the only guy that I knew in LA.
Can you tell us a little bit about Simon Soussan? Because I've been telling, you know, my friends some of the stories that you've told about Simon, and he is, do you know what I mean? He there's bad things wrote about Simon, and like you said, he was a bootlegger, out and out bootlegger, but he did license music as well if he could get his hands on it. And do you know what I mean? He was responsible for getting a lot of the sounds over to England.
I mean, he was a what's the word? A hustler. Right. I mean, I never saw him as anything other than that because of his whole demeanor and because of just the way he was. You could tell very, very quick intelligence there. But he also developed this, you know, he didn't have an awful lot of what I call moral fiber about it. He really wasn't bothered about other people. I've seen the same behavior since. Okay. And you do quite often get that. You get people that are incredibly knowledgeable. Some of the most knowledgeable people in the world on soul music are not really people that you'd like as people. You respect the fact that they're intelligent and that they know this incredible stuff, but you wouldn't necessarily want to be hanging around with them. Yeah. But Simon was one of those guys. It's like we got on. I mean, that was the thing. I bought records from him, and he'd rip me off. You know, he sent me wrong records, not records I'd ordered. So I was like, well, this guy obviously, you know, and he also made lots of claims that I thought were ridiculous. So I thought the only way I'm going to figure it out is if I meet him, you know. But when I went to LA, I checked into a hotel by myself, got from the airport, got to LA, sorted a hotel out for a week, and then rang Simon. I said, hey, I'm in LA. I don't want to tread on your, you know, tread on your feet. I'm just letting you know I'm here, right? In case I bump into you. And he was, well, no, I must have done this before I even got to LA. I was in contact with him before I got there because he met me at the airport. Right? He picked me up at the, he met me at the airport and dumped me at the hotel, thinking about it. That's right, he was the one who chose the hotel. And I mean, he was a lot of fun. He really was a lot of fun. If you're going to go to LA, he was absolutely the best person to know because he did know everybody, right? And he sort of got away with quite a bit of stuff. I mean, he was mates with Ike Turner.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the studio that we made Shalimar in.
Wow.
You know, so it's Bollock Sound in East LA. Yeah, and I mean, the whole way that Shalimar came about is because I was in the club with Simon, right? And we're listening to We're in a club called Chez Nous in Beverly Hills, and they played the Ritchie family record, The Best Disco in Town, right, which is like a disco medley. And I said to Simon, you know what, if somebody did this, but with Motown tunes, it'd sell 1 million in England, you know, because all those girls love dancing around the handbags to all that, and they're all like, you know, very obvious tunes. You know, do a medley of those, right? And Simon just looked at me, and like with cash registers in his eyes, he said, what a great idea, baby boy! What a great idea! He said, right, you know, let's go now. I think he pulled me out the club to go back to his place to start selecting the tunes.
You're joking?
No. And then the next day, we went round to a guy called what was the guy's name? Don Hockett. Right, we went down to round to a guy called Don Hockett to write the arrangements. Right, for the whole thing. Don Hockett used to do arrangements for the Four Tops. So Simon had these connections, right? He had the connection to Ike Turner. He had the connection to all the Motown guys because we used Motown guys on the session, you know. So, you know, Jack Ashford was playing percussion.
Jack Ashford, wow.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think who was alive. Certainly it wasn't Benny Benjamin, but I think James Jameson played bass on it. And then
what was that like for you then, Ian? You know, growing up, first hearing Motown records right at the start of this story, going through the whole Northern Soul thing. Now you're here in LA with these, you know, legends.
It was surreal.
Yeah.
It was surreal, right? I was telling somebody the other day, right, that I met Solomon Burke in a lift, right? Again with Simon, we're going to the bank of all things, probably because he owed us money. And we went to the bank and this huge guy in the lift. And Simon went, Solomon Burke, right? And then, you know, started shaking his hand and talking about his records. Like, Simon was a major fan. He was very, very, very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Right. He absorbed record labels almost like no one else. So he would know simply by looking at a label if there was something worth pursuing. I mean, I went that way myself. I can almost look at a record label now and get get some tips.
Yeah,
and so on. Right.
Just for the listeners who are listening in, a little bit of background information on Simon. He was a French. Do you know what? He is a mysterious guy to try and research, but he was a French Moroccan guy that was a tailor. I might be wrong. You can correct me here. He was a tailor, and he got brought over to work in Leeds. He started hearing soul music, Black is Black, then decided that he was going to go to LA to start discovering these records, importing them, bootlegging, reissuing, and importing them to places like Selectadisc. That story of his life is just out of this world, I think. Do you know what I mean? Just to get over here to Leeds and be involved in the Northern Soul scene, but then to say, right, I'm going to, you know, LA to even create these records. Do you know what I mean?
There's certain people. I mean, Simon always had a lot of self-confidence. He was a good-looking, intelligent guy, and he could normally talk his way in anywhere, and nothing scared him, right? I mean, it's kind of also a nutcase. You know, like I say, he sure you read the story about him smashing his car radio because funk kept coming on. Right, this guy did not do things by halves.
Wasn't this in the middle of like a highway or something?
Sunset Boulevard. Right, it caused about a 1 mile jam. Right, and people were screaming at us that Simon was just smashing the radio with his shoe. Right, he'd already ripped the radio out of the car, and he then got out the car and took his shoe off and started smashing the radio. And I said to him, Simon, why are you so upset?
Yeah.
Right. You know, so he would get very passionate. And the story of how he got into Northern Soul, he was in Jumbo Records in Leeds, and he got talking to this guy that used to go to the Wheel, and Al, I forgot what his second name is now, quite quite a big character when I was getting on the scene. And Simon got chatting to him, and Simon was saying, I love the beat on this.
Yeah.
And then, anything that's like Black is Black. And then Al started telling him about all these other records and the scene. And Simon was a really quick learner. And then, knowledge would just pour out of him in the same way Pete Lawson. Yeah. Simon, again, would give you all the connections on a certain record, I was with him finding records, when we were actually going through records in people's houses. Like when I found The Duck, Willie Hutch, right, which nobody knew at the time. It was covered up. But going through the records, that suddenly, Willie Hutch on Dunhill, let's do The Duck, and my brain wasn't working. Well, it's called The Duck, my brain wasn't working quite fast enough to make the connection, but I knew there was something there. And I always remember saying, what's this Willie Hutch on Dunhill? And Simon looked at me and went, you've just found a very rare record, baby boy. Right, and then I looked at the other side, Love Comes Out, and suddenly it all clicked. God. Yeah. Right, I suddenly just uncovered.
And did you get to keep that 45 or not?
Oh, no, he did his usual. Right, I need to take this copy, baby boy, because I need to compare it and make sure I have the cleanest copy. I mean, he did that with Kev Roberts, with the Casualiers. Kev found Dance, the Casualiers.
Did he find about like numerous amounts of copies, like 20 copies or something, and went through every single copy to try and find the cleanest one for his collection and never seen him again?
Yeah, exactly. Right, that's exactly what he was like. But in his, to his credit, his records were filed meticulously, right? Because he had his own collection that he never let anybody near. So he had his own collection and wouldn't even let me look through. But every so often, I'd say, oh, what about so-and-so, so-and-so? And he's like, yes, I have that record. And he'd look through and pull it out. And I'd look at it, Christ, that's been sat there in his shelves for God knows how long. But he could also pull out contemporary stuff. I'd ask him what his favourite record of all time was. And he'd say, oh, Unity, the OJs. Like, really?
Yeah.
Really? He said, yeah, what a record. And then he'd go on his shelves, pull it out, put it on, and then just listen to the vocals, baby boy. You're never going to beat those vocals. His favourite group was the Dramatics, right? And he'd travel anywhere to see them. And he was, he was a real soul fan.
Yeah.
Preferably Northern soul. Didn't like slow soul. Had to be up-tempo Northern soul. Yeah. Which is great. That's exactly what I like.
Exactly. Yeah, everything that he put out on a label and imported to the UK, Selector Disc and the likes, was all 100 mile an hour stomping soul stuff, wasn't it, to sell?
Yeah. And I hated all that stuff he did with the Soul Fox and Soul Fox. I just thought, nah, that's all horrible.
He started making his own.
I've never been into that. But surprisingly, I've never been into over commercializing the scene. Yeah, or at least if I do anything that's commercial, it's got to be fairly solid and respectable, like the Northern Soul soundtrack, for instance. Things that you can be proud of, rather than you're just trying to milk a scene for all it's worth,
So how well did the Shalimar stuff do for you then, the Uptown Festival? And
me personally,
well,
not that great. No, I got conned on it. I mean, I ended up. I should really say me and Neil, because I was in business with Neil Rushton. So It's Neil and I that co-financed Shalimar, and then I just happened to be in the studio. Neil was back here, but we co-financed it. We were the co-producers on it. for a number of reasons, mainly not having a work permit, I couldn't get it officially put on the. There are all sorts of problems there in terms of receiving payment as well. So we worked out a very complicated deal where we got fronted 20,000, 25,000 records, something like that, which we were kind of meant to pay for. But then I suggested maybe we shouldn't pay for them until we've received, the half of the Shalimar advance. Yeah. That never came, so we didn't pay for the rest. So we ended up kind of okay. And then Simon got ripped off by Soul Train. They went bust.
Oh,
and then used the money to create Solar Records. And that was Don Cornelius, yes. Who I met the first night I went to LA, believe it or not. Simon took me to this club called the Candy Store. And, Don Cornelius was there. So I was in my Oxford bags and a patch jumper.
Yeah.
Right,
In LA.
They're looking at me in LA like, what's with the trousers, man? I had to get myself a one-piece sort of catsuit thing that we were all wearing at the time
to fit in.
Really within days. Nobody had talked to me with those trousers on.
That's great. So what was the next steps for you, Ian? After that, you're in LA. Do you know what I mean? You've done the northern thing. You've done them steps. You've worked your way up to the top of the league with being a DJ. You've gone across to LA. You've had a bash at doing some producing. Shalimar. What's next for you?
Yeah, well, I came back to the UK thinking that I could be a millionaire pretty soon with the Shalimar record, because it really took off right after my visa had run out, and so I had to come back to the UK. And then I saw it going up the charts. But I've got to be honest, the Shalimar to me was a bit crappy. Right, I was actually embarrassed. Right, with it, it just sounded too corny, too commercial. All right, it's nice it sold 1 million.
Yeah.
But like I say, Simon ended up getting screwed by Don and Dick, right? By this point, I was back in the UK. And then I was thinking, you know what, actually, I really fancy getting a job in the music business now. So then I started applying for jobs and ended up with Decca as a Northern promotion man.
Wow.
Where they gave me a car. I had to service all the stations, basically, Nottingham, Sheffield, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham sometimes Scotland. So I was responsible for doing that. And so I bumped into Richard Serling on the road, quite often, because he was doing the same job for RCA.
Right, okay.
Right. So the 70s was a combination of working for Decca, and by this point, I was now DJing on the jazz funk scene.
Right.
And all of a sudden, boom, that took off more or less exactly when I got back from the US. And we opened up the Central, funnily enough, for jazz funk. And it was a boom, an absolute boom time. And then that turned into all dayers. So if you looked at the 70s, the first half of the 70s, it was all Northern Soul. And almost the second half of the 70s was all like jazz funk and disco and contemporary stuff. And then I was basically on the road with Decca during the day. I was DJing 2 or 3 times a week, but big gigs, lots of people, and running the Central on a Friday night. And then eventually I ended up DJing at the Warehouse in Leeds and became like the resident DJ there. That's what led to Soft Cell doing Tainted Love.
This is another thing I
was on the door.
Another thing that I wanted to ask you about. Yeah. So because you play a big part in that, Ian. I've been told by various people and read that the remake of Tainted Love by Gloria Jones was a lot of it down to you.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it was. I mean, we were all playing it, right? But the happy accident that Mark was, the cloakroom guy, and he just happened to really connect with the words to that record. So that was a nice example. Really through that, and my involvement at the Warehouse, then I started going down to London a lot more and meeting people from record companies. So the Warehouse was the main place up north where they do promotional stops. So we had them all. We had Duran Duran, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Bauhaus, ABC, you name it. That whole period in the early 80s when all that kind of electronic pop stuff was going back, Human League, all that kind of thing. That was a boom time for the Warehouse. And then in 83, I moved to London and then worked for EMI, and then had quite a lot of success there. A few number ones, Diana Ross, which one was it? The Chain Reaction.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Freddie Jackson, Tavares, so I was working with those guys. Then in the mid-80s, I was running Fourth and Broadway for Island Records, Chris Blackwell. And I signed, I had Sly and Robbie's first hit. I signed a group called the Wild Bunch that then mutated into Massive Attack. In the 90s, I did Master Cuts, right? So from 1990 to, 1993, I was steering the whole Master Cuts series. Towards the end of the 90s, I worked at Warner Brothers and won an award for marketing, did a big marketing campaign. Sold a lot of CDs, 2.5 million CDs in a month and a half. So that was good. Then I helped launch Simply Vinyl, which was repressing classic albums on 180 gram vinyl. Did that for a while. Then I ran Salsoul Records in the UK from 2002 to 2006, and that was great. That's what got me working with Tom Moulton and people like that. I had access to the tapes, and then in 2009 I went to the BBC and ran Harmless Records for them up to 2015, and did an awful lot of stuff. We did the Northern Soul soundtrack, all the Philadelphia International 40th anniversary and all that. So I just did a quick speed up because we might have been on for another few hours.
Yeah. And what a life, though. Do you
I've got to get a cup of tea.
No. It's been fantastic. I knew this would be an amazing interview as it is, but it's just been great just to sit back and listen to your life story. What a life, mate. What a life.
Oh, man, I know. I will be listening to the show myself because I managed to get it. You got it out of me really well about how it all started and, all that kind of thing. So therapeutically, it's done me quite a bit of good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ian. It's been amazing. Really enjoyed. And you've made my Saturday night a little bit better.
Okay. Am I allowed to go have a beer now?
You can go and have a beer, my friend.
Thank you very much, dear.
Thank you so much, mate.
All right. See you later.